In this module, we are going to talk about cell junctions. We are going to talk about the anatomy of cell junctions. We are also going to talk about, briefly going to look at structure and also some of the functions these junctions perform. So let's get started. Cell junctions, they are present at points of cell-cell contact and cell matrix contact in basically all tissues. There are a few exceptions. For example, blood cells, RBCs, they don't make cell junctions when they're mature. There are some other examples also of cells. These cell junctions can be categorized into three different groups. Communicating junctions that are responsible for communicating how two cells are functioning, which are adjacent to each other. They can communicate to each other through these junctions. Occluding junctions, also called tight junctions, which seal two adjacent cells together, the membranes of two adjacent cells together. Anchoring junctions, junctions that hold cells in their right place, and they're very generally much stronger than, for example, communicating junctions. They hold the cells in the tissue, and these anchoring junctions can be between cell and cell or cell and cellular matrix, extracellular matrix. The first category we are going to talk about is occluding or tight junctions. These junctions seal cells together to prevent passage of molecules and ions through the space between the plasma membrane of adjacent cells. Here, for example, this is the plasma membrane of one cell, and this is the plasma membrane of the adjacent cell, and these two membranes are sealed together by these junctions in such a manner that the material present on this side cannot transverse and go to the other side. So there is no paracellular transport of any material. These junctions, as you can see, they somewhat look like stitches. Two fabrics have been stitched together. These junctions give precise control to cells over which substance can pass through a particular tissue. These junctions are one of the most common tissues you'll find these junctions in is the epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue is the type of tissue which is generally lining the vessels, different vessels, for example, blood vessels, or our digestive system also has epithelial tissue, the lining of epithelial tissue. These tight junctions are present in all vertebrates, and they also help cells maintain their polarity. I will explain what I mean here by polarity in subsequent module, but here I would just basically mention that they basically allow cells to place certain proteins on one side of the cell and not the other. The invertebrates don't have tight junctions. They have a different type of junction which performs sort of a similar function. It is called the septate junction. We'll also talk about briefly about those type of junctions too. The next category of junctions I'm going to talk about is anchoring junctions. These mechanically attach cells and their cytoskeleton to their neighbors or the extracellular matrix. So here, for example, this is one cell. This cell is attached to the adjacent cell, which is right here, through these anchoring junctions. This is a type of anchoring junction which is holding these two cells together. There are several types of anchoring junctions. We'll talk about different categories of anchoring junctions too. These anchoring junctions are connected to the cytoskeleton. These blue lines you can see here are basically components of cytoskeleton or cellular skeleton. In this case, they happen to be intermediate filaments. We'll talk about them later on too. So anchoring junctions can hold two cells together, or they can fix a cell to the extracellular matrix. This yellow substance here is the extracellular matrix. And here, for example, when I was talking about cellular polarity, let me mention that some proteins are strictly present here on this side of the cell, and they are not allowed to go or not allowed to move to a different part of the cell via tight junctions. These junctions you're looking at here are the tight junctions. They're very, very tight as the name suggests. So these proteins cannot move through the plasma membrane and go to a different part of the cell. So anchoring junctions, basically we were talking about anchoring junctions. That's what they do. They anchor cells in a tissue. Anchoring junctions, they resist tensile forces. And tensile forces are those forces, for example, when you pull on your skin, that's a tensile force. So if this cell is pulled, it is going to resist tension because it is attached to its neighboring cell and also to the extracellular matrix. So one of the major functions of anchoring junctions is to resist tensile forces. There are 4 different types of anchoring junctions. We will look at all of them in much more detail later on, but for here I would just like to mention that there are adherent junctions, there are desmosomes, and then there are hemidesmosomes, and also focal adhesions. The structures you are seeing here, these are the desmosomes. As I mentioned, we'll talk about them in more detail. And the structures here are the hemidesmosomes. We'll look at their anatomy and functioning in later modules subsequently. Next category of junctions, cell junctions I'm going to talk about are the communicating junctions, or also referred to as gap junctions. They mediate the passage of chemical or electrical signals between adjacent cells. For example, heart muscle cells contract in unison. All the heart muscle cells are not innervated by a nerve. So these cells, basically, when the cells which are innervated by a nerve, they are simulated. They can pass on the signal to the adjacent cell via these gap junctions. I would like to also mention there are no gap junctions in sperms or erythrocytes. And also these junctions, the proteins that these junctions are made up of, if they are injected into an embryo, they can disrupt the embryo, and also the embryo will have, as a result, defective embryonic development, because the cells in the embryo need to communicate with each other what the adjacent cell is doing, which lineage it is going to follow. So these junctions play a very important role in early on during embryogenesis, also in different tissues. We have talked about heart. Also, the liver cells, not all liver cells are innervated by nerve, but when some of the liver cells, they receive a signal, they start, for example, breaking down glycogen. They also signal the adjacent cells to also start breaking down the glycogen, although those cells have not received a direct signal from the nerve. These junctions are present. They not only hold two plasma membranes of two cells together, but also they form a pore, and this pore can also allow different small molecules to pass through, but not the larger ones. Also, I would like to mention here, these gap junctions are not always open. They can also close in response to different stimuli. So this is basically different types of cell junctions in a nutshell. We'll talk about them in more detail in subsequent modules. So some of the functions we have talked about these junctions is that they can seal cells to adjacent cells. They can help cells exchange small molecules or ions. They also help cell resist tension, tensile forces. They provide mechanical support. And also another function, very important function that I did not talk about in this module, but I will be talking about it in greater detail in later modules, is these junctions, the proteins that make these junctions also provide very important signals to the cell and help them perform their duties.